In a city where a careless mother is caught up in parties and luxury, she made a mistake that changed everything. She left for a party and completely forgot her 5-year-old daughter, Ifeoma, waiting alone at school. As the hours ticked by, Ifeoma's hope faded until a stranger arrived and took her away. What happened to this beautiful and innocent young girl will shatter your heart. Subscribe to Savannah Storytime for unforgettable tales filled with shocking twists, deep emotions, and lessons that will stay with you long after the story ends. In the city of Awele, where the streets glitter with the wealth of its inhabitants, Oluchi lived the life many could only dream of. Born into a family of privilege, her days were filled with luxury, high-end fashion, and endless parties with friends who shared her carefree lifestyle. It was on one such night, under the neon lights of a club, that she met Chukwuma. He was a tall, ambitious man, full of charm and mystery, a rising star in the corporate world. Their connection was instant, and the chemistry between them undeniable. What started as casual drinks turned into late-night dinners, and soon, nights blurred into weeks of whirlwind romance. Chukwuma was unlike anyone Oluchi had ever met, focused, determined, yet playful enough to keep her entertained. He often joked that they were opposites. While she loved to live in the moment, he had his eyes set firmly on the future. But opposites attract, and before long, they became inseparable. However, the romance soon came with an unexpected twist. Oluchi missed her period. The moment she realized she was pregnant, a wave of fear washed over her. She wasn't ready for motherhood, and she certainly wasn't ready to give up her life of freedom and fun. She quietly made plans to terminate the pregnancy without telling Chukwuma, too scared to face his reaction. But as fate would have it, Chukwuma found out. One evening, he noticed her anxious behavior and gently confronted her. Cornered, she confessed her plans, expecting him to lash out in anger. But instead, Chukwuma took a deep breath and called her family. When her parents arrived, they were furious, not with Chukwuma, but with Oluchi. Her family insisted that abortion was out of the question. They saw Chukwuma as a good man from a good family, and in their eyes, this was the perfect opportunity for her to settle down. Under pressure from her family and Chukwuma's sense of responsibility, the two were married within weeks. Months later, Oluchi gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Ifeoma, whose name meant a good thing, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Chukwuma adored his daughter, but his job often took him away from home. As a top executive in a multinational company, he traveled frequently, sometimes spending weeks out of the country. The weight of parenthood fell on Oluchi, but she was ill-prepared for the responsibilities. To ease her burden, Chukwuma hired Ngozi, a gentle and hardworking maid, who quickly became more of a mother to Ifeoma than Oluchi herself. Oluchi, still clinging to her social life, entrusted most of Ifeoma's care to Ngozi, leaving home early for brunches and returning late from dinners with friends. As the months turned into years, Ifeoma's tiny hands always reached for Ngozi instead of Oluchi, but the young mother hardly noticed. Life in Awele continued, but beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to form. Chukwuma, the man who worked tirelessly, jetting across states, sometimes even crossing borders, just to ensure his family lived a life of comfort. Each time he returned home, he would beg Oluchi with the same words, "My dear, why don't you move to where I work? You and Ifeoma can be close to me, and we can spend more time as a family." But Oluchi, always the social butterfly, would laugh it off. She had her reasons, you see, the parties, the endless gatherings, and her clique of friends who formed what they called the Ladies' Club. This lifestyle was her kingdom, She thrived in it and would never trade it for anything, not even for her family. To make her life easier, Chukwuma hired Ngozi, a quiet, hard-working woman who took on the role of a mother far more than Oluchi ever did. Oluchi entrusted Ngozi with everything, from feeding Ifeoma to putting her to bed. Ngozi, handle it, became her signature line. Meanwhile, Oluchi would sip champagne and dance the night away, barely knowing if her daughter cried herself to sleep. Years passed, and Ifeoma turned 5. By then, Chukwuma had been posted to work in Awele, much to his delight. Finally, he thought, they could be a family again. He took a month off work, eager to reconnect with his wife and daughter. But little did he know that trouble was brewing in his own home. One day, Amara, Oluchi's best friend, paid a visit. Amara, single and living life on her terms, but with eyes set on something, or rather, someone. She arrived at their house to see Oluchi, but fate had something else in store. Chukwuma was home that day. Polite as ever, he welcomed her and asked her to wait for his wife. But Amara, always looking for an opportunity, had something else in mind. She stayed, trying to make conversation, subtly eyeing Chukwuma, testing the waters, looking for cracks in his loyalty. As luck would have it, Ngozi walked into the room, interrupting Amara's little game. The maid, always observant, didn't miss the tension in the air. She greeted Amara respectfully and offered her refreshments, unknowingly preventing what could have been a disastrous situation. But Amara, furious that her plan had been foiled, smiled sweetly, hiding her intentions as she left the house. Later that evening, Amara met with Oluchi, spinning tales of betrayal and lies. Your maid, Ngozi, I think she's overstepping. You know, she was quite comfortable around your husband today. Maybe a little too comfortable. I'd watch her if I were you, she whispered, planting seeds of doubt. Oluchi, already insecure and heavily influenced by her best friend, didn't even think twice. That very evening, she called Ngozi to the living room, her face cold, her voice sharp. Without much explanation, she told her to pack her bags and leave. Just like that, years of loyalty dismissed with a few cruel words, all because of a jealous friend's whisper. Chukwuma didn't argue much when Oluchi fired the maid. Why would he? It wasn't the first time Oluchi had made a rash decision based on her friend Amara's influence. At least now, he had the chance to take care of his daughter, Ifeoma, more closely while enjoying his month-long leave from work. For 2 weeks, it had become a routine. He'd prepare meals for Oluchi and Ifeoma, drop Ifeoma off at her school, and even pick her up. It gave him a sense of normalcy in the whirlwind of his hectic life. But, as fate would have it, peace never lasts too long. That Friday morning, just as he was settling into the day after dropping Ifeoma at school, Morning Shine International, his phone buzzed. A major issue had arisen at work, something that couldn't wait. He needed to catch the next flight immediately. Rushing back home, he found Oluchi lounging in her finest silk robe, barely acknowledging his hurried presence. Something urgent came up, Chukwuma said, slipping his phone into his pocket. I have to travel. Please pick Ifeoma up by 1 p.m. after school, okay? Oluchi nodded absently, her eyes still glued to her phone. Sure, she mumbled. Chukwuma hesitated for a moment, feeling a flicker of unease. He knew Oluchi, and he knew her priorities weren't exactly centered around their daughter. But with the urgency of work looming over him, he had no choice but to trust she'd remember. It was already 12 p.m. when Oluchi's phone buzzed. It was something casual, yet glamorous enough to impress her friends. Amara's name flashed on the screen, and she answered with excitement. Oluchi, you won't believe it. The nightclub is throwing the biggest party today, and all the top clubs are coming. We, the ladies' club, can't miss this. It's our chance to show them who runs this town. Bring out the big guns, darling. Show them you're not just another rich girl. Come carry me to meet the others. Oluchi's heart raced with excitement. The party. She'd been waiting for an opportunity like this to shine. In no time, she slipped into her most expensive dress, decked herself in jewelry, and hopped into her gleaming Akuna SUV. The idea of picking Ifeoma up from school barely crossed her mind. At 1 p.m., the school bell rang, signaling the end of the day. Ifeoma, ever the patient one, gathered her things and waited at the gate for her father. The other kids were already being picked up by their parents, but she knew her daddy was busy. She'd just wait like she always did. Hours passed. By 4 p.m., Ifeoma and 2 other students were the only ones left. Principal Adesua, ever watchful, noticed the little girl sitting quietly by herself and decided to make some calls. Both parents unreachable. As minutes drag on, Ifeoma felt a bit uncomfortable. She needed to pee. Not wanting to disturb anyone, she slipped away to the back of the school, where no one would notice. While there, a butterfly caught her eye, its wings shimmering under the fading sunlight. Captivated, she chased it, forgetting about everything else for a moment. Meanwhile, the last parent arrived to pick up the remaining students. The principal, busy marking scripts, asked the gateman if everyone had been picked up. The gateman, new and unaware, mentioned seeing the last girl being taken, mistaking Ifeoma for one of the other students. By the time Ifeoma returned to the front of the school, she found the gates locked. The building was deserted and her heart sank. She cried out, calling for someone, anyone. But her voice was lost in the silence of the evening. When the clock struck 7 p.m., the once lively school had fallen into eerie silence, with only the shadows of the night creeping in. Yet, in the distance, the soft whimpers of a little girl pierced the air. Neka, a woman drenched in sorrow, stumbled past the school gate. Her eyes, swollen from 3 days of endless tears, scanned the street like a desperate mother searching for her child. Just days ago, Neka had buried her daughter, but her heart refused to accept it. Grief had twisted her mind, making her believe her baby girl was still out there somewhere waiting for her. Then there it was, the cry she had been waiting for. Neka's ears caught the faint sound, and to her, it wasn't just a random child. No, in her broken mind, it was her daughter. Her heart pounded, and she rushed towards the source of the sound. She's alive! Neka's voice broke through the darkness. My daughter is alive, I hear her. Nearby, some passers-by turned their heads, unsure of what to make of her frenzied shouts. But Neka didn't care. She begged them for help, and they, seeing her desperation, couldn't refuse. A ladder was found, and the group worked together to climb over the school gate. With shaky hands and a trembling heart, Neka reached for the little girl, her daughter, and held her close, feeling a rush of overwhelming relief as she cradled Ifeoma like a fragile treasure. No one questioned her. The way Neka hugged the child, whispering soothing words and stroking her hair, it was as if this was her daughter, lost and now found. The onlookers didn't dare intrude on this moment of perceived reunion. They simply watched as Neka carried Ifeoma into a waiting cab. The night seemed to close in as the cab sped off, carrying Neka and Ifeoma away, away from the locked school, away from the truth, and deeper into the tangled web of Neka's delusions. The next morning, just as the sun began to peek through the curtains, Oluchi stumbled into the house at 7 a.m. her body drained from an entire night of reckless partying. Her designer heels clicked softly on the tiled floor as she moved past the kitchen and into her bedroom, barely acknowledging the silence that filled the house. Her head throbbed, her mind clouded with exhaustion and the lingering scent of expensive wine clinging to her breath. All she wanted now was sleep, nothing more. Without a second thought, she collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, and drifted off to sleep, oblivious to the world around her. By the time she woke up, the sun was high in the sky, shining brightly through the windows. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 1 p.m. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, groggy, but beginning to feel the hunger gnawing at her stomach. "Where's Ngozi?" she muttered, calling out instinctively for the maid, only to be met with silence. It was then that reality hit her. Ngozi was gone. She had fired her 2 weeks ago in a fit of jealousy, egged on by Amara. A sigh escaped her lips as she lay back down, remembering her husband, Chukwuma, wasn't home either. He had traveled. Her stomach growled louder, and she lazily reached for her phone, thinking of what to eat. But just as she was about to call for takeout, a thought struck her like lightning. Ifeoma. Her heart skipped a beat. When was the last time Ifeoma ate? Panic crept up her spine as she sat up quickly, her mind racing. And right at that moment, Chukwuma's call came through. "I'm so sorry I haven't called since yesterday, love." Chukwuma's voice came through the phone, calm and unaware of the storm brewing in Oluchi's chest. "I'm on my way home. How's our little princess?" Oluchi's blood ran cold. Ifeoma. She hadn't picked her up from school. The teachers hadn't called either. Why hadn't they called? "Oh, she's sleeping," Oluchi lied without thinking, her voice shaky. She had a long day. Chukwuma didn't seem to notice the tremor in her voice. "Good. I'll see you both soon." As soon as the call ended, Oluchi sprang into action. Her heart pounding in her chest, she grabbed her car keys and raced to the door, desperate to reach the school and pick up Ifeoma. But as she opened the front door, reality hit her like a brick. It was Saturday. School didn't open on Saturdays. Her hands trembled as she dialed Ifeoma's class teacher, only to be greeted with shock on the other end. She wasn't in school on Friday. The teacher's voice was filled with confusion. "I lost my father and had to travel to the village. I left on Thursday." Oluchi's throat tightened. Panic was bubbling into full-blown terror now. She immediately called the school principal. "Everyone left the school, Mrs. Adesua," the principal assured her. "I personally handled the class on Friday, and all the children left by 4:30 p.m. But Ifeoma never came home. Meanwhile, far away from them in a dingy hotel room, the little girl sat huddled in a corner, tears streaming down her face. She had cried and begged for her parents, but all she got was silence from the woman who now held her captive. Neka, in her twisted grief, had taken the girl as her own, convinced Ifeoma was the reincarnation of her deceased daughter. With every sob that escaped Ifeoma's trembling lips, Neka's mind spiraled deeper into madness. "Eat! Eat it!" Neka shouted, pushing a sandwich filled with peanut butter into Ifeoma's tiny hands. The little girl whimpered, her stomach turning at the sight of the food. She tried to explain that she couldn't eat peanuts, but Neka wouldn't listen. "My daughter loved this. You will too." Neka's voice cracked as she forced the sandwich into the child's mouth. Minutes later, Ifeoma vomited, her small body racked with pain. She clutched her stomach, wailing in agony, her face pale as she collapsed onto the bed. In a frenzy, Neka rushed out to buy medicine from a nearby store, leaving Ifeoma locked in the hotel room. But by the time she returned, the child lay lifeless, her breathing shallow. Fear gripped Neka as she called her family doctor, begging him to meet her in secret and not reveal her whereabouts. What she didn't know was that the doctor had already alerted Akin, her husband. The hotel door opened hours later, and the doctor and Akin walked inside Neka's hotel room. The sight of a lifeless child in the hands of his wife shattered him. Without hesitation, they grabbed Ifeoma and rushed her to the hospital, asking two of the men that followed them to grab Neka for treatment as she wailed and lost in her delusions. Back at Chukwuma's home, the air was thick with tension. Oluchi sat on the edge of her bed, her eyes red from crying, her mind replaying the events of the past few days like a broken record. How did everything spiral out of control so fast? Her daughter missing, her husband barely speaking to her. It all felt like a bad dream. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, her phone rang. It was Amara, her so-called best friend and ringleader of their ladies' club. Oluchi, babe, you won't believe it. There's another party tonight. This one is major. Every other ladies' club in the state will be there, and we need to show up big to clinch the title of Best Club of the Year. Oluchi froze. Amara knew about Ifeoma. She knew her daughter was missing, yet here she was, pushing for another party. Come on, Oluchi, Amara continued, her voice dripping with excitement. Don't let this whole daughter thing get you down. She'll show up. Kids always do. But this party, we can't miss it. It's our moment. For a moment, Oluchi felt herself sinking back into the mindset that had led her here. The parties, the endless nights out, the desperate chase for attention and validation from women who thrived on gossip and luxury. But then, something snapped inside her. This was the same group of people that had distracted her, the same group that had made her forget the most important person in her life, her daughter. It was as if a veil had been lifted from her eyes. All along, these women weren't her friends. They were her downfall. Amara and the others didn't care about Ifeoma. They didn't care about anything other than their own status, their own social standing. Oluchi stood up, her grip tightening on her phone. Amara, she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. I'm done. Done with the parties, done with the club, and done with you. My daughter is missing, and all you care about is some shallow title. You and this club, you're the reason I lost her. Amara gasped on the other end, but Oluchi didn't wait for a response. She ended the call, her hands trembling, but her heart firm. Severing ties with Amara and the ladies' club was the first step. She had a lot to fix, but this was the beginning of her redemption. Back at the hospital, Ifeoma lay still, unconscious after receiving the treatment that had saved her life. The doctors had done all they could, and now it was a waiting game. Her small, fragile body rested, but her spirit fought. As the hours passed, her parents were left in a world of silent prayers and restless pacing. It was then that the truth began to unravel. Akin, the husband of the woman who had taken Ifeoma, desperate to bring an end to this madness, noticed something crucial. The girl's uniform was a connection, a lifeline to finding her real family. He didn't know the child's name, but he was determined to right the wrongs his mentally ill wife had caused. With the help of a compassionate nurse, Ada Obi, who was familiar with the school, Akin reached out to the school's principal, Adesuwa. The principal's heart sank when she heard the news. This was the missing girl. Without wasting time, Adesuwa gave Akin the contact details of the parents, Chukwuma and Oluchi. Chukwuma and Oluchi were at the police station when the call came through. It was a mixture of disbelief, relief, and urgency that flooded their minds. Their precious daughter was alive, but had been through a nightmare they could never have imagined. Without hesitation, they rushed to the hospital. escorted by police, hearts pounding with fear of what they would find. For a week, Ifeoma remained in the hospital, her tiny body recovering from the trauma she had endured. Oluchi, who had once been so distant from her motherly duties, refused to leave her daughter's side. Every minute, every tear, was a reflection of the regret she carried. The once carefree woman had transformed, staying by Ifeoma's bedside, holding her hand, watching every breath, every slight movement with hope. Chukwuma, amazed at his wife's sudden change, could only watch. His heart was conflicted. He was grateful for her newfound sense of responsibility, but the pain of everything that had happened still weighed heavily on him. How had it come to this? How had they let things spiral so far out of control? When Ifeoma was finally discharged, Oluchi begged for forgiveness. She looked into her husband's eyes, pleading to make things right. "I will go wherever you want. I'll leave with you. Just let's start over," she whispered. Chukwuma, still hurt but willing to give his family another chance, agreed. And so they left Awele city for good, a fresh start waiting in the distance. Chukwuma applied to return to his former post, far from the place that had nearly broken them. Ifeoma, resilient and brave, was re-enrolled in another school, away from the memories of her ordeal. As they drove away from the city that had once been their home, they carried with them the lessons of pain, love, and second chances. The road ahead was uncertain, but together they would face whatever came next. And so they drove into a new chapter of their lives, one filled with the scars of their mistakes, but also the promise of a fresh start. Oluchi had learned the hard way that the cost of carelessness could be more than she ever imagined. Ifeoma's laughter, once taken for granted, now became the heartbeat of their home, a reminder of how fragile life truly is. Chukwuma, silent but resolved, kept his family close, knowing that the second chance they had been given was not just a gift, it was a lifeline. As the city of Awele faded behind them, so did the ghosts of their past, leaving only the hope of a brighter future ahead. Because in the end, it wasn't the parties, the wealth, or the status that held their family together. It was the love they almost lost, but found again in the most unexpected way.